On the morning of July 11th, 1996, workers arrived at a motel construction site in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was an ordinary morning, until they saw the body. A man was lying in the parking lot. He was partially undressed. His clothes were disturbed, and scattered around him was thousands of dollars in cash and valuables. The dead man was a Canadian citizen. His name was Robert Dennis Blair Adams. He was 32 years old, and within hours, investigators would discover something that made his death far more disturbing. Blair had not come to Knoxville for work. He had no known friends there, no known family, no obvious reason to be there at all. In fact, he had traveled thousands of miles in just a few days, and according to people who knew him, he had been terrified. He believed someone was trying to kill him, but he never explained who. And now, someone really had killed him. The question was Blair running from a real person, or was he running from something else? Just days before his death, Blair was living in Surrey, British Columbia. He worked as a foreman for a construction company. People who knew him described him as someone who liked his work and generally lived an ordinary life. But during the summer of 1996, his behavior began to change. His mother noticed that he was having severe mood swings. He wasn't sleeping properly. Something seemed deeply wrong. She asked him what was happening, but Blair wouldn't explain. According to his mother, he told her that he didn't think he should tell her about it. Whatever it was, he took the secret with him. On Friday, July 5th, Blair withdrew his savings. He also emptied his safe deposit box. He gathered more than $6,000 in cash, along with thousands of dollars worth of gold, platinum, and jewelry. Then, he began preparing to leave. There was no clear explanation for why. No announced vacation, no obvious business trip, no destination that made sense to the people around him. He simply began dismantling his normal life. Then came the border. On Sunday, Blair attempted to enter the United States, but customs officials refused him entry. He was an unmarried young man carrying a large amount of cash, and according to Unsolved Mysteries, officials became suspicious that he might be involved in drug trafficking. Blair was turned away. But instead of returning to a normal life, his behavior became even more erratic. The following day, he went to work, but he wasn't there to continue working. He asked his employer for his paycheck and quit. Then, that afternoon, Blair purchased a round-trip airline ticket to Frankfurt, Germany. He was scheduled to leave the following day. For a moment, it appeared that his destination had finally been decided: Germany. But then, everything changed again. Blair went to a friend's house, and this time, according to the account later presented by Unsolved Mysteries, he was in a state of panic. He believed someone was trying to kill him. He wanted to get back into the United States, but his friend couldn't take him across the border. So Blair left again. The next day, instead of flying to Germany, Blair returned to his original plan. He rented a car. He made his way back toward the American border, and this time, he managed to cross. He eventually reached Seattle. From there, he bought a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C. The price itself caught investigators' attention. According to a detective interviewed by Unsolved Mysteries, Blair paid roughly $770 for a one-way ticket, even though a round-trip ticket would have cost considerably less. Why spend that much money to travel in one direction when he didn't appear to have any clear destination waiting for him? Nobody knows. Blair arrived in Washington early Wednesday morning, and then he did something even stranger. He drove more than 500 miles southwest to Knoxville, Tennessee, a city where, according to investigators, he had no known connections, no family, no friends, no known business, nothing obvious that would explain why he had chosen Knoxville. One detective later described the journey as baffling. Why fly all the way to Washington, only to turn around and travel hundreds of miles back toward Tennessee? There was no obvious reason. But Blair kept going, and eventually, he reached Knoxville. Around 5:30 that afternoon, Blair was seen at a gas station. His rental car wouldn't start. He approached the attendant. The attendant examined the situation and discovered something strange. Blair had the wrong keys. The rental company was already closed, so Blair couldn't simply call and get another key that evening. He was stranded. For the first time since leaving Canada, his journey had reached a dead end. But he still had somewhere to go. He managed to get a ride to a nearby Fairfield Inn, and that is where the final chapter of his life began. When Blair entered the hotel, the staff noticed him, and one employee later remembered him vividly. She described him as nervous, agitated, paranoid. He seemed to be expecting someone, not casually waiting for a friend, but watching the entrance, watching the lobby, waiting for someone to appear. But nobody came. At least, nobody that anyone could identify. The hotel's security footage later became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. During roughly an hour at the hotel, Blair entered and exited the lobby 5 times. 5 times. He would leave, then return, then leave again, then come back. There was no obvious explanation for the repeated movements. Eventually, he rented a room. The clerk gave him the key. Blair put the key in his pocket, and then he walked straight back out the front door. He never entered the room. The time was approximately 7:37 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting of Blair Adams alive. For the next several hours, nobody knows exactly what happened. That missing stretch of time is the heart of the mystery. Somewhere after leaving the hotel, Blair ended up at a motel construction site approximately half a mile away. The building wasn't finished. The property wasn't a normal place for a traveler to spend the night. And yet, that was where Blair's journey ended. At approximately 7:13 the following morning, construction workers discovered his body. He had been beaten. He was partially undressed. His clothing had been disturbed. His socks were turned inside out. His shoes were off, and his shirt had been ripped open. Investigators also found numerous cuts and abrasions on his body. Some of the injuries were considered consistent with attempts to defend himself. But the most disturbing discovery was what was lying around him. Money. Nearly $4,000 in American, Canadian, and German currency, and another amount of gold and jewelry. Blair had traveled with valuable possessions, and the killer had apparently left them behind. If the motive was robbery, it was a remarkably strange robbery. The autopsy revealed that Blair had suffered severe trauma. He had sustained a violent blow to the abdomen that ruptured his stomach. His injuries ultimately resulted in a fatal infection. Authorities classified his death as a homicide. But there was no obvious suspect, no clear motive, no explanation for why Blair had been attacked, and no convincing reason for why the killer had left the money and valuables behind. The investigation now had to answer 2 separate mysteries. Who killed Blair Adams? And why had Blair come to Knoxville in the first place? Then investigators returned to the beginning, to Canada, to the strange behavior, to the money, to the sudden resignation from his job, to the abandoned trip to Germany, to his desperate attempts to enter the United States, and especially to what he had told his friend. Someone was trying to kill him. Was that statement a warning, or was it a symptom of something else? There is no definitive answer. One possibility was that Blair genuinely believed he was being followed. Another was that his fear had been based on paranoia rather than a real threat. Unsolved mysteries presented the possibility that Blair may have been escaping from his own delusions. But that theory doesn't solve the murder, because even if Blair's fear was entirely psychological, someone still attacked him. Someone still left him dead at that construction site. Someone still disappeared without being identified. And that creates an uncomfortable contradiction. Blair may have been wrong about who was after him, but he wasn't wrong that something terrible was about to happen to him. There is another detail that makes the case difficult to understand. Blair had money, a lot of it. He had gold, jewelry, multiple currencies, yet those possessions remained at the scene. This doesn't prove that robbery was not involved, but it makes a simple robbery theory difficult to explain. If the killer wanted his money, why leave it? If the killer wanted his valuables, why walk away from them? And if the killing wasn't about money, then what was the motive? Personal revenge? A confrontation? A meeting that went wrong? An unknown enemy? Or something else entirely? There isn't enough evidence to say. And this is where speculation has surrounded the case for years. Some theories suggest Blair may have been running from someone. Others suggest that his mental state may have been deteriorating. Some have wondered whether his strange journey was connected to something that investigators never discovered. But none of these theories has been proven, and that's important. Because the truth is, we don't know.
What we do know is astonishing enough. A man left Canada without notifying his family or friends. He emptied his savings. He removed valuables from his safe deposit box. He quit his job. He attempted to enter the United States. He was refused. He bought an expensive ticket to Germany, then abandoned that plan. He became terrified that someone wanted him dead. He crossed into the United States. He flew from Seattle to Washington, D.C., then drove hundreds of miles to Knoxville. He became stranded there. He checked into a hotel. He repeatedly entered and exited the lobby. He paid for a room. He never entered it. And less than 12 hours later, he was dead. Thousands of miles from home, with his valuables still beside him. More than 2 decades later, the case remains listed among the Knox County Sheriff's Office's cold case homicides. The official case page confirms that Blair left Canada without advance notice to family or friends, traveled from Seattle to Washington, D.C., drove to Knoxville, rented a room at the Fairfield Inn, and is believed never to have entered that room. And despite everything investigators have learned, the central questions remain. Who was Blair afraid of? Was there actually someone following him? Did he know his killer? Did he meet someone that night? Why did he leave the hotel instead of going to his room? And why was his money still there after the killing? There is one final possibility that makes this case particularly haunting. Maybe Blair had spent his final days running from a threat that didn't exist. Maybe fear pushed him farther and farther away from home, until he ended up in a city where he knew nobody. Or maybe his fear was justified. Maybe there really was someone behind him. Someone Blair couldn't identify. Someone he couldn't explain to his family. Someone who followed him across borders, across thousands of miles, all the way to Knoxville. And if that is what happened, then Blair's final night wasn't the beginning of the mystery. It was the end of a journey that had started days earlier, when a man suddenly became convinced that somebody wanted him dead. The terrifying part is that we'll probably never know whether he was imagining it, because by the time the truth could have been discovered, Blair Adams was gone. His killer was gone. And the secret that drove him from Canada went with him. So after all these years, one question remains. Was Blair Adams running from someone? Or was he running from a fear that he could never explain? And if someone really was following him, how did they find him in Knoxville?